Anyway, today's paper day. I like to keep it pretty light, not least of which because, for the most part, we have very little to talk about, right? You guys haven't watched the movie yet. You probably haven't looked at the prompt yet. You're kind of coming in just like, what's going on? So we're kind of starting from scratch a little bit today. But also, some of you might have been up kind of late working on the paper, this and that. I try to keep that in mind on paper days. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at the prompt for the next unit. We're going to start that process. All I really want from you for that bit of class is if you have any questions, confusion, if you think you know what we're doing but you're not sure, which I guess you would call a clarification, anything like that, I want you to ask me. What's your name, man?
Jardel.
You're Jardel. Hi, Jardel. Oh, all the way on the bottom. I got cocky. I didn't think anybody else was coming. There we go. For the next part of class, we're going to actually practice a little bit of sort of the mechanisms you're going to need for the second paper. Again, you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, which is the documentary we're going to work with yet, so we can't work with it today. But I'm going to, basically, all we're worried about today is starting the conversation I want us to have for the next couple weeks. Be pretty low bar, pretty low stakes, all right? All right. To begin with, let's touch the Star Trek thing. Yeah, all right. We're going to look at the prompt for paper 2. And of course, if you'd like to follow along at home, you can pull this up on CourseNet. Our second paper is a critique. Some differences between this paper and the last one. This one is 3 pages as opposed to 2 to 3. So of course that means you really want to be sniffing the bottom of that 3rd page, if not kind of creeping onto the 4th page a little bit. Format, it's MLA, we talked about it. We're not going to talk about it anymore. If you have questions you can ask me, but as a class, we're not going to spend much more time on MLA, okay? Source text, I mentioned it. The Social Dilemma, this is on Netflix. It is made by Netflix, so it's going to be hard to find other places. Probably got to get a Netflix password. And it will be due March 3rd. What's today, the 10th of February? Is that right? Yeah, okay. So not quite a month, right? A little less than a month. I guess a week less than a month. But still, plenty of time. We're going to watch a documentary. That'll be due for next time. And then pretty much everything after that, we'll be talking about the documentary, talking about parts of the paper, hopefully working on the paper as we go. And you'll just magically have it done on the 3rd. You'll turn it in. It'll be great. What the paper is. I have a little bit to say about this. Of course, I never just read this at you. If you want to read it, feel free. It's there for you. But the way I like to describe this paper is that it builds on the last paper, right? A rhetorical analysis is, as we keep saying, not what Ansari says, but how he says it. We are sort of diagramming the way that Ansari would build his argument. Spent a whole month talking about that. For this paper, we're going to do something similar. We're going to watch the documentary, and we're going to think about, because the documentary has an argument too, okay? And we're going to look at different parts, different smaller, I guess you call them scenes, from the documentary, and think about how are they building that larger argument. The difference here is we're going to judge that argument. At the end of the day, your argument this time is how successful is this documentary in making whatever argument it's trying to make. Most of the time, just to kind of introduce the idea to you, most of the time, even when someone does a pretty good job, I happen to think the documentary is pretty solid, okay? They're not perfect, right? And I'm telling that to you now because I don't think, more often than not, you can watch a documentary like this and say, okay, they knocked it out of the park 100 out of 100 times, every scene is great, blah, blah, blah. In much the same way, I don't think you could really come at it from the opposite side of the coin. Oh, this thing is trash, nothing about it is good. Usually, a fair critique is somewhere in the middle. Do some things really well, this part could use some love, things like that. I have a note right here, sort of in the same vein of the advice I just gave you. for whatever reason, not all of you will do this, but some of you have a real penchant to want to attack a thing based on something it doesn't do. I think I gave you an example here. That's not a great example, but basically the example I give, I say it wouldn't make sense to knock the documentary for not including your favorite YouTube star. If it's not in it, most of the time, it's just not in it. You can't attack something for not being there. Does that make sense? It'll make more sense when we look at some scenes perhaps, but that'll be a very real, for some reason, phenomenon we'll have to fight with some of you guys. You want to pick apart a thing based on something that's not even there, and it's like, well, that's not fair. That's not a good faith assessment. We want to work with the text based on what's in it, right? But maybe that'll make more sense as we go. At this stage, does anybody have any thoughts, questions, concerns about the paper, anything at all? Outstanding. All right. Well, the next part of our program, we'll move right along. You know, I kind of don't know. Her volume was good last class, Grace? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to trust that. We'll just see what happens. What we're going to do now, well, I have to set it up a little bit, but we're going to practice a little bit of critique. I have it pulled up here. Before we do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about how to approach critique. Generally, it's a good idea to have some criteria, some standards ahead of time. Now, the difficulty for us will be, I imagine, most of you don't watch very many documentaries, if any, right? Maybe you had to watch one for school before or something. You probably thought it was kind of boring. And that's true, by the way, of some documentaries as well as some movies. Sometimes they're just not terribly enthralling. However, you got to give it a shot. So, before we start the conversation about documentaries, I wanted to start in a place I felt like you guys were a little more familiar with. And by that I mean movies. I know we don't really go to the movies right now. At least we shouldn't. Be serious. But, way back when, like a year ago, and some change maybe, you guys are largely the viewing public. You guys go to the movies maybe all the time back then, right? I have children. I think I went to the movies once every 2 years. So I'm going to need you to help me out. When you would leave the movie theater, or even leave somebody's house, maybe you used to watch a bunch of movies like with buddies at somebody's house, okay? When you would leave that space when you watched the movie, you would immediately, this is natural, you would immediately have an opinion. That movie was great, that movie was trash, that movie was somewhere in the middle. And if you're talking to your buddies about that, like, I mean, I know I would do, oh yeah, what'd you think? Blah, blah, blah. You would give evidence, right? You would cite certain elements of the movie. Oh, I liked the blah, blah, blah. I really thought the way this was done was goofy, right? And here's why. So what I'm curious about for a couple minutes, I just want you to entertain me with this. How do you judge a movie? What are some things you look at, especially, like, think of the last movie you liked or the last movie you hated, right? What were some things about it that you kind of pinpointed in your mind and you're like, oh, this is why I felt that way? Take your time. We got plenty of it. Yo, what's up?
The story was like absolute trash.
The story. Okay. I'm gonna put this stuff over here.
Just the way they built on the plot. It's really like uninteresting.
Do you mind if I ask what movie it was?
That's kind of hard to do right now.
Oh, wait, did you?
I'm just kind of saying that in general.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't thought about that, but I want to get some stuff up here. Yeah. Oftentimes, although not always, I think we're interested in the story, the plot development. If you're halfway into a movie and then something happens that, for whatever reason, doesn't make sense, doesn't that kind of take you out of the thing? And all of a sudden you realize you're watching a movie now, you're not in it? That's a problem. Okay. It's kind of a strike against it. Conversely, if that never happens and the whole time you're just enthralled and you're with whatever's going on, well then, sounds like they did their job, putting the thing together, right? Okay. What else? There's some real easy ones here, guys. This is your thing, I assumed. How do you judge a movie? good or bad. If you thought a movie was great, surely all of you have at least one movie you're like, oh, it's so good. What was so good about it?
The ending.
The ending. Why?
It's like either the person that was supposed to die died, or like basically that.
Okay. Well, there's different ways to talk about that, but it's sort of an offshoot of this, right? Because the ending is part of the story. But like some kind of a resolution, we tend to like that. There are some movies that end ambiguously, and depending on the movie, some people will like that, other people will be deeply upset by that. My wife was actually watching a documentary yesterday about a serial killer because people do that, and she looked it up to make sure in the end that they caught the guy. She was going to be really upset. And she watched the whole thing, and in the end, they're like, we still don't know. She wasn't going to be able to handle that, you know? She needed a resolution. Okay. Other things. Come on now.
The acting.
Acting. Good. And again, weirdly, it's more important in some films than others, right? But if someone is just really wooden, or very obviously maybe overacting, again, much like the story, that can take you out of the thing. You're like, wait a minute, oh, this is silly. Like now you're not even in the movie, right? Yeah, absolutely. Quality of acting, I'll put with that writing. I don't know if anyone is familiar, this will date me a little bit, but not the original Star Wars trilogy and not the new one. There was one that came out when I was a kid, the prequels, episodes 1 through 3. And for a long time, everyone talks about how bad the acting is in those movies, which is strange because there's a lot of really big name actors in those movies. And then people started to kind of make the point, well, the dialogue is terrible. And somebody asked Natalie Portman about it. She's in those movies. She's like, yeah, we would have to look each other in the face and deliver these awful lines. It gets hard to act when the whole time you're like, this is stupid, right? How are you supposed to, when the things you're saying are dumb? So writing can be part of that as well. Good. Let's take another angle. You guys are mostly silent. What's a movie you guys like? What's big among the youth? For instance, I just, this weekend, saw, a trailer, saw a commercial for Fast and Furious 9. There's 9 of those now, apparently. They're making 9 of those. Somebody out there must like them. What's your opinion on the Fast and the Furious films? Do you enjoy them? Do you not? Huh?
You was good at first.
They were good at first.
You know,
What's the issue?
you're doing too much. You're getting away from race.
Yeah. I will say the trailer, my wife walked in right about the time it started. She's like, why is that car going sideways through a building? I was like, because once you hit 9 of these things, you got to stop making sense. Like, it's not, you know? So what you're kind of talking about, because I remember the first one. Again, that came out when I was a kid. That's how old those movies are. The theme, especially if it's a franchise, questions about how that theme changes, whether you stick to it, right? What you're doing with it. I mentioned the sideways car. Effects are huge in those movies. We want to see explosions, let's be real. That's pretty cool. But at the same time, sometimes you can maybe go a little far. You know, I believe I haven't seen any of those movies since the first one, but I've seen commercials. I know at some point they're jumping cars between buildings and like ridiculous. To me, that seems like it might be a bit much. You know, if I was watching that movie, I'm like, all right, this is goofy, right? Again, it takes me out of it in much the same way poor acting would. Okay. I guess that's going to be good enough. So, there's more we could add here. This is a decent list. And again, I think all of you, in one shape or form, at some point in your lives, have exited a theater or left somebody's house, and pretty soon thereafter started a conversation with somebody about, oh, you got to check out this movie, or oh, that was hot garbage. And then you leapt into elements like this. You cited certain parts of the movie. maybe a scene, maybe something about a scene, and you try to convince that person of your argument. You are critiquing that movie, right? Now you're not always fair about it, and again, we're going to start talking about that really next week, maybe some today. But generally, you guys know how to critique a thing. That's what we're doing here, okay? All right, now I'm going to wrestle with the lights. We're going to see what happens. Oh yeah. Oh, there's so many lights. Oh Jesus. Hang on. That? No. No. That. What is that? I hate everything. I should have asked her. Oh, there's something. Okay. Okay. I like where this is headed. Nice. Okay. So, what we're about to look at. It's 2.5 minutes long. It is a trailer for a movie. Okay? It is, I don't want to give you, because I want you to just see it. It's a thriller, though, the movie. I don't know any recent films. It's a horror film, okay? It's meant to be scary, in a way. Let's see what happens. Again, I also don't know how loud this is. I'm just hoping the room doesn't hate me. But all I want you to do while we watch this for 2.5 minutes, I want you to sit back, think about some of these elements or anything else that might stand out to you. Would you see this movie? Why or why not? What can you point to in the trailer that makes you say, oh, that looks really interesting, or oh, what the hell is that? All right? Let's see how we do. I'm going to struggle with trying to get this up real quick, so. What?
I wouldn't watch that.
You wouldn't watch it? Why not?
I guess it's like an under-budget movie.
It's low budget.
Yeah, low.
What leads you to say it? Again, we can start here. That's not quite a critique yet, right? Because good movies can be low budget. What about it led you to say
The Eagles look fake, like really fake. I think they could have done that better in the animations.
So we're talking about the effects. Because obviously, at least this day and age, you're going to shoot a movie like that. The birds are going to have to be fake. Is anyone familiar with Alfred Hitchcock's Birds? Really old horror film. For a lot of those scenes, they actually tied birds to strings and then tied that to the lead actress. So when you see them kind of swooping and attacking her in the movie, they are really doing that. We can't do that these days. So we use computers. My favorite YouTube comment for that trailer, someone says birds.gif. Just kind of plug that in. It seems like that's how they describe the effects. Is that a problem, the effects in the film?
Yes.
Oh, very strong. Why? I'm not disagreeing. I'm not defending the effect, but I'm curious. Can we put words to that? Is that your hand? I can't tell. Oh. What's wrong with, like, if you had to say, again, if you were building, the start to a body paragraph, we're focused on the effects, and, we're just rough drafting, so we're saying, about as low budget as my marker, apparently. They look low budget, they look fake, I think is what you guys are getting at. Is that good? Is that bad? What's the issue?
You could tell they couldn't actually see him.
Why?
They were in air, even though the Eagles
They're just,
were there.
I try to, and it's easier with the mask. I was working really hard to keep a straight face while you guys are watching it, because I didn't want to, tip anybody off. But yeah, the part where they're standing in front of the hotel and they're just like, there's one guy to the right who just goes like, I love that. It's so ridiculous. So it seems like that's a bad thing though, right? Why? We can do this. Again, you guys know movies. I would imagine you've seen films with better effects than this, right? Why looking fake here? Is that a bad thing? Yeah.
Like I think earlier you said there's some movies with bad effects that are so good, but the thing about that movie in particular, it seemed like there was just no effort put into it. Like I thought it was made as a joke. At least the trailer or something. But.
Okay, so what you're talking about is the effects look fake, which Well, what you're talking about is tone, like the tone of the film.
Yeah, it's just.
Now here's the best part. It's an unintentional joke, right? If the movie were made, and it's hard to judge from a trailer. My wife and I, this movie's like 10 years old now or something. Before we had children, you have more time. We sat down. It used to be on Netflix. We sat down and tried to watch it one night. We're like, let's watch this insane thing. We got halfway through. We couldn't make it any further. We knew it was bad. Like, we saw the trailer. We knew what we were getting into, but like, we were like, all right, we get it. Anyway, it's a serious film. The guy is trying to scare you, trying to, make like again, I don't know any. What's a contemporary horror film? Help me out. What?
Quiet Place.
Quiet Place. Okay, yeah. See, I can't watch horror movies because I'm a bitch. I am. I totally am. I know that about me. I've seen a bunch. I don't need to see anymore. That movie, I imagine, does a better job than this one, right? And part of it probably comes down to not looking fake, right? Not making an unintentional joke out of itself. So tone, we can put that over here. The tone of the movie, like Quiet Place versus Fast 9, very different tone, right? So you go in with different expectations. They should look different. They should feel different. Effects in our trailer here for Birdemic don't quite hit the mark. So that would be a negative critique. Anything else strike you guys from the trailer? Again, if you need to consult our list, that's fine. Yo, what's up?
Super dramatic.
What do you mean? Can you point to anything?
Just their conversations, it was just like, I don't know.
The dialogue.
Yeah, they just tried too hard. I don't know.
Does anybody kind of agree with that? Let's help them out a little bit. Yeah, what's up?
The main male character lacked emotion, even though his facial expressions, he was just blank.
He's not the best actor, we would say. Right? Okay. So here we're talking about performance of the male lead. How'd you describe him again?
Emotionless.
Emotionless. There's a good word you'll see thrown around sometimes with acting. He's wooden, like he's a block of wood. And again, that's pretty accurate in the trailer as well as in the rest of the movie. A lot of it, is he happy? Is he sad? Is he scared? You really can't tell because it's a lot of it's the same the whole time, which is not ideal. But why? Again, the same way we talked about our last paper. I don't know if you realize this. We're just building topic sentences for a paper we won't write. Just to be clear, we're not writing about Birdemic. Although maybe one day we should. That would be fun. Anyway, this is something we're pointing to in the trailer, right? His performance is this. No one is really going to disagree with you on that, okay? So what though? What's our part? How does that affect our critique of the film? I think all of us are thinking this is a bad thing, that his performance is wooden. Why?
Because it doesn't help carry the tone of the movie, especially if he's the lead or one of the leads.
Yeah, why? I'm obviously not disagreeing with you, but I want to push a little more into that.
Because, it's supposed to be a terror film, I think you said.
Yeah.
And, if it's a terror film, you gotta act like you're actually frightened of something.
Why?
Because, it just makes it known that it's actually like a terror film.
Well, sure, but let's think about how horror is supposed to work. Like, what's a horror film supposed to do to the audience?
It's supposed to scare them.
Good. How might the acting on this guy's part affect that
It doesn't evoke the right emotion.
from the audience?
Yeah.
So we're saying in a way, I just want somebody to put it into words for us. Like, how does the emotion these characters display affect us?
Because it makes the audience feel like it's actually real, that it's actually happening to them. And
Good.
In the movie, and his acting was so bad, you couldn't get into it.
Good. It takes you right out, right? And now all of a sudden you're just laughing at it, right? Good. That's an argument, right? First male lead is wooden. I already said which, but you know, we're just drafting. So, which, takes you out of the film, doesn't allow you to sort of feel the right emotions or what have you, right? Absolutely. That's my big problem with horror films. Like, outside of this one, because even I don't get scared of this one, right? But that whole suspension of disbelief, I don't know if you've heard of this, mine kicks in about 20 seconds into a movie. So when I watch a horror film, I'm in it. Like, I'm actually in it. And I'm terrified. If it does its job. Good. I'd like to get one more if possible. Because these are two good ones. Effects. Every time I've taught this trailer, the first thing somebody brings up is the effects. It's hard not to, right? Sure. The performance, in this case of the male lead, yeah, pretty easy to point to that. Can we think of one more thing? Can we, and this may be a bridge too far, can we think of anything that's maybe good about the trailer? I saw your hand go down. I just want to put it out there, you know. Maybe there's something.
The storyline was good, they just didn't have the right people to
Okay.
portray it.
So the premise, because and look, I have more words than you guys do, but what you're talking about, because we can't quite know the story because it's a 2.5 minute trailer of like an hour and a half, 2 hour movie, right? But the premise of the story, like the idea, do you guys understand the difference? So again, Fast and the Furious 9, none of us know the story, that movie's not out yet, but we know the premise. We already know the premise. Vin Diesel and The Rock and a bunch of other guys are going to drive real fast and blow shit up, and they're going to look awesome doing it, and that's it. That's the premise. So you say the premise here is maybe why, but let's put some words to that real quick. The idea of the movie is maybe interesting. Why is that? Can somebody help her out? I think I might agree. What's interesting about the idea of the movie? For this part, you might have to forget that the effects are bad, that the acting is also bad. But if someone just came to you and like described the idea of this movie, you might be, oh, that could make a good horror film. Why?
Somewhat
I'm
original.
gonna push back on that because again, Hitchcock, Birds.
Birds movie, I thought it was a rip-off.
Do what?
I thought it was that at first. It was like,
Yeah, well, it kind of is a ripoff of that, which would be another negative critique, perhaps. But we'll sidestep that. What about the premise? Is potentially interesting. Before you see the trailer, this is a movie about birds, kind of going nuts, and just they start attacking people, and people have to live in that world now. They got to deal with that. What's potentially interesting about that?
For some people, they believe it might happen in real life, so they want to learn about it.
What do you mean?
Like conspiracy theory people. Like,
Oh, those nutty people. Okay.
yeah, they might think this is actually real, so in a way, they see it as an informational film of how to handle it, even though.
Well, I know you're working real hard to make this work, and I appreciate that. I do my best not to, because we want to skew more toward like people that make sense, because we want our arguments to make sense, right? Like, we're not necessarily saying a horror film is realistic. So like even A Quiet Place, right? We'll go back to that. I would like to think anyway, I've seen trailers of it. I saw, oh man, I don't remember what movie, I was in the theater a long time ago and I saw a trailer for the new one, Quiet Place 2. Fuck. And as soon as it came on and I realized what it was and something started, I went, no. I said to my wife, no. I don't want it in my life. But it's not terribly realistic, right? Even the best horror films aren't like realistic, you hope. But there's still a good premise, right? Like here. So, the premise of the film. What about it? We're trying to, and again, some of you might have to like lie to yourselves and say that it's interesting. That's fine with me. I don't care. What is potentially, you could argue, interesting about the premise of this film? Just the idea. Birds start attacking people. I don't know, and again, we could watch the trailer again, but it doesn't seem like you guys will want to. Just before that, they talk about polar bears are dying, sort of ice caps are melting. Like, there's a subplot in this movie to do with the birds. Anybody pick up on that? Like, this movie's about birds attacking people, but it's also about this other thing. Yeah, well, climate change, like the fact that we're destroying the earth, right, type of thing. And so the kind of one argument the film is making is like, because we're doing that, maybe what happens? The birds are like, well, put a stop to this shit, type of thing, right? Now I admit, that's wild. But it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting idea. And again, you may not feel that way, but as an exercise, I just want us to try it. Why might that be interesting? That whole idea for a movie.
It gets you thinking about it.
About what?
The climate change stuff.
Why is that potentially interesting? Why is like thinking about something that a movie just even kind of brings up? Why might that be a good thing for a movie?
More effective to bring it to attention,
Bring what to your attention?
the issue, or
Sure,
I guess.
sure. But again, we're judging the movie, not the argument around climate change, right?
It's more relatable, I guess.
Perhaps. Why? Why do you think?
Someone has to deal with real life.
Good. So the premise of the film, it can do all kinds of things, by the way, right? But one of the things the premise does is it ties into the conversation around climate change, right? Which is something you've all heard of. Different people have different opinions of it, which is unfortunate because scientists don't. But we live in a world where people know what that is, generally. And when you watch a movie that kind of breadcrumbs some of that stuff in there, doesn't that make the movie itself feel like it's more in your world? You know what I'm saying? And the idea, I think, would be, maybe if the effects and the acting were better, that would make it easier to invite you into the rest of the movie. Now, all of a sudden, you are a part of that. You are engaged in the sort of horror that's going on. But of course, pretty much every other element of the film drops the ball, you could say. So what we've done here, these are three sort of topic sentences, right? If we were writing this paper on Birdemic, which again, we are not, body paragraph, negative, kind of a nice body paragraph. When it came to our thesis, we would have a lot of fun, I think, talking about how much trash this movie is. We would do that. We would absolutely do that. But by the end of the introduction, we would also admit, hey, whatever went on when they made this movie, at the outset, the premise, I think they had some good thoughts. They didn't execute them very well, but they had some interesting thoughts. That's about as fair to that movie as you can be, I think. Right? We didn't completely trash it. I know when that trailer was over, not one of you in here thought to yourself, oh, we can say a nice thing about it. But we did. Like the only nice thing you can say. We found it. So even for that trailer, it was not completely negative. The other way you could spin it real quick, and we're not going to do this as a class, but I just want to talk to you about it. When it comes to talking about our documentary, one of the first things we're going to talk about on Monday is who's the audience and what are they trying to, the documentarians, what are they trying to accomplish when it comes to speaking to that audience, okay? Because that's going to change some things. The way we approached this movie was, again, I think in good faith, we approached it basically like this was a movie made for people to go see, horror fans, like people that like movies like that. It was made for them, and we looked at it like those people. You know what I'm saying? On the flip side, if we approach this like, all right, well, I gotta ask a question first. Has anyone ever gotten together with a group of friends and purposefully watched a bad movie? Anybody ever done that? It's a good time. If you haven't done it, I recommend it. You gotta find a bad movie. Birdemic's a pretty good one. That's what my wife and I were doing that night. We hung out and got through half of it. It was just so bad we couldn't watch anymore. But it's kind of because you laugh while you're watching it at the unintentional jokes, right? You enjoy yourself. You don't take it very seriously. If we critiqued the movie from that perspective, I think it would be resoundingly positive, right? It's a good time. Hang out with your friends. Don't even step out during a scene. You're not going to miss much, right? Good stuff. All of a sudden now the premise, maybe it's a little too serious. It's a little bit of a downer. Bring that climate change conversation into my hangout, right? Totally skews our critique. Again, I don't think that's what this film was made for. I don't think that's what the documentary we're going to talk about was made for. But it is important to consider sort of the goal. Who this thing is aimed at. Just like we talked about with Ansari, right? Who the audience is, what they're trying to accomplish when speaking to that audience. That's what we're going to open up with on Monday. Questions at this stage? Okay. So for Monday, all you owe me is I just want you to watch the thing. It's called The Social Dilemma. It's listed on your syllabus. It's on Netflix. It's pretty easy to find. It's relatively new. But again, you can just search for it if it doesn't just pop up somewhere for you. I don't remember how long it is. Hour and a half, 2 hours. Set aside some time. What I would recommend for you, because I imagine none of you have watched it. Watch it, obviously. But maybe have a pen and paper handy, just in case something strikes you, right? Mostly I want you to watch it because I want you to actually see the thing. But in the off chance, while you're watching it, something strikes you. Something, and again, our criteria will be a little bit different next time. But the way we talked about Birdemic, right? We were judging it based on specific qualities, specific elements. That's pretty similar to how we're going to talk about this documentary. So as you're watching it, maybe jot down some notes. It would help you out. All right. I'll see you next week. Thank you, guys.